really moves around. This is a poem by Leigh Hunt called Abou Ben Adhem. And I remember in probably 6th grade, or junior high at least, having to memorize this, but of course I don't, so I'll have to read it. I don't remember it. Abou Ben Adhem, may his tribe increase, awoke one night from a deep dream of peace, and saw within the moonlight in his room, making it rich and like a lily in bloom, an angel writing in a book of gold. Exceeding peace had made Ben Adhem bold, and to the presence in the room he said, "What writest thou?" The vision raised its head, and with a look made of all sweet accord answered, "The names of those who love the Lord." "And is mine one?" said Abou. "Nay, not so," replied the angel. Abou spoke more low, but cheerily still, and said, "I pray thee then, write me as one who loves his fellow men." The angel wrote and vanished, and the next night it came again with a great wakening light, and showed the names whom love of God had blessed, and lo, Ben Adhem's name led all the rest. You know, the writer of the 20th century, whose name was Dorothy Day, was a writer who worked primarily through the Catholic Church, but she was terribly interested in the condition of mankind. And one of her great quotes is really a quote that helps to illustrate the second great commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. And what Dorothy Day said was that, "I only love God to the extent which I love the person that I dislike the most." Meaning that it's terribly important to love your neighbor, even if it's a neighbor that you don't agree with, or a neighbor that you don't understand, or even a neighbor that you're afraid of. And certainly there are many many instances in the scriptures of Jesus loving people whom the locals didn't really love and didn't really understand and didn't really appreciate. I think of the Gerasene demoniac, and I think of the blind Bartimaeus, and I think of the people, the woman who had hemorrhaged for 12 years, people that society was willing to cast aside and willing to disenfranchise and willing to unvoice, so to speak. And Jesus was loving them into the kingdom. People who were despised, particularly the Gerasene demoniac, those people didn't want him to be healed. They had chained him up. They had hoped to dispose of him off in the caves by the seaside, that perhaps one extraordinarily bad weather event might just eliminate him altogether. So afraid were they of this demoniac. And when Jesus comes and drives the demons out of him, and you probably remember the story, they dive into the pigs, and the pigs run down the embankment and dive into the water and exterminate them. The people come out to see what's going on, and they're shocked. They didn't want him healed, they wanted him dead. And Jesus, this is one of his miracles in the gospel, a miracle that demonstrates to us all that we really are called upon not necessarily to like our neighbor, not to approve of our neighbor, not to embolden our neighbor's bad actions, not to accommodate our neighbor in that sense, or enable, which is a really popular word in the pop psychology set. We're not called to enable people. We're called to love them. And in loving them, to love them with a love that's so pure, a love that is of Christ himself, that we are in turn loving God. And we're demonstrating and modeling this kind of love for the people who live in the darkness, who continually choose the darkness, who like the darkness. And so those of us who are saved, those of us who have a Christ-centered life, who believe in Jesus, are called upon to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we're not loving our neighbor, says Dorothy Day, then we're not loving God very well. Because this is the commandment that God gave us, not the suggestion. And so we read that the key to the salvation of Abou Ben Adhem, who had not given a lot of thought to loving God, who was not a religious person, who probably didn't go to worship on a weekly basis as he was called to do, but was very good with his fellow man, very thoughtful, very attentive, very compassionate, very friendly. He didn't have to suffer all kinds of foolishness. He didn't have to underwrite all of the wicked schemes of his neighbors. But he simply observed and was willing to love them on a level. And so, having explained this to the angel goes. Obviously, the angel himself does not have enough authority to enter Abou Ben Adhem's name into the golden book, but has to go and confer with the Almighty, and then comes back and reveals this notion that in loving his fellow men, in Abou Ben Adhem's own words, he indeed has become the most beloved of God. A wonderful piece of poetry by Leigh Hunt that illustrates a great scriptural mandate that we all have to love your neighbor as yourself. Amen.